To speak to Matt Mahmoudi, a researcher and advisor at Amnesty International on AI and human rights. He joins us now from London. Matt, welcome to the program. I was really intrigued to hear that more people from more than 100 countries took part. So obviously you wanted to look at racial profiling, I presume. What emerged from your study in terms of how facial recognition technology was tracking, say, for example, people of color compared to white people?
I think it's very important. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think it's really important to note that the technology itself stands to be in harm's way of most individuals across New York City, no matter whether you're white or black or brown. I think it's important to note, however, that the technology does asymmetrically affect black and brown populations, not least because of the fact that it is undergirded by an existing discriminatory practice of policing by the NYPD. And so the worry from our side is that the use of this technology, which is not only largely experimental and stands to have serious flaws in terms of bias, but also when it is 100% accurate, stands to simply augment or put on steroids the existing discriminatory practices of this police. And what we found was that largely the 15,280 cameras that we found across 3 boroughs stand to seriously harm folks who are coming out and protesting, especially in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protest that started their second rising just last year, and that it also stands to affect undocumented communities who are trying to move between different spaces, coming from communities of color and neighborhoods of color, and moving in towards the city, where the ubiquity of the camera becomes more clear. In terms of direct correlation between neighborhoods of color, we see, of course, that in East New York, that is one case in which they were some 500 cameras. And of course, we know the racial makeup is of largely Black and Latino people who are subjected to these cameras. And we know at this stage, the NYPD has no plans of coming clear on their use, the extensiveness of the use. And so we are calling for this ban to come through at both the city level and the state level in New York.
Matt, you say the facial recognition technology in these cameras is undergirded by the policing practices of the city itself. So we know what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement and the desire to get the police to treat everyone humanely, whatever race they may be. And you'll also know that if you put into Google beautiful baby, you're going to see 99% of them are going to be white. There'll be one black baby, which will be about 45th in the picture list. So is it a question of the facial recognition technology in New York having to be programmed by people? Because obviously people have their inherent biases.
That's correct. So there are 2 different dimensions to this that makes facial recognition a particularly problematic piece of technology when it comes to race. The first dimension is sort of the early issues or flaws related to bias, as you mentioned, which came about from the data set that was fed into facial recognition algorithms. Temnit Gebru and Joy Buolamwini have been writing and talking extensively about this. So one of the things that it found was, of course, that between 30 to 50%, depending on what studies you look at, and sometimes 90%, of the results being spewed out of a facial recognition algorithm is a false positive, especially when it comes to Black women and when it comes to Black people in general. Now, if you solve for that problem, say in a few years' time, and you make the algorithm 99% accurate, hypothetically speaking, the question that we're asking is, do you still want to equip a police force who has been known to be discriminatory on racial lines with a technology that it can use sometimes without a warrant or without due explanation, suspicion, or sort of knowledge of criminal wrongdoing on individuals, and in particular on individuals they are already targeting who happen to be Black and brown people? So really, we are saying, even if the technology was free of its biases, it is incompatible with human rights on grounds of being a technology of mass surveillance, in the way that it scrapes billions of images from social media without our knowledge of consent, in the way that it targets and stands to augment existing discriminatory practices across law enforcement agencies, and in a way that it stands to be a serious violation of our right to equality and non-discrimination. So as a technology, we do not believe that facial recognition technologies for mass surveillance and identification are compatible with international human rights standards, nor with the US Constitution.
How far is Amnesty International going to take this, Matt? I mean, the report is highlighting an extremely important issue, but you need to take it, don't you, to the mayor of New York. because presumably law enforcement in the city is going to say, okay, we may be a bit hit and miss, but let's show you the numbers. And now that we're using facial recognition technology, if the police can prove that crime is down compared to previous years when they didn't have that technology, I don't know. Law enforcement is going to say it might be worth it, but the mayor may disagree if you press him.
That's a really good point. I think it's important to note that there is currently no evidence that facial recognition leads to lower rates of crime or that it helps to increase security, which is often the narrative that is used. One of the things that the public advocate in New York is trying to broach is whether we need to redefine in the context of New York our notion of public safety to be one that is inclusive of the safety of Black and brown people in particular, who have been left out of this debate. And when it comes to security, of course, we're talking about the security of populations that aren't subjected to these technologies. The things that we've been doing over the last few months, actually dating back now to September, is putting together a coalition with local New York organizers who have been pressing not only the mayor's office, but also the state Senate on passing a moratorium at the state level to ban remote biometric technologies for mass surveillance, as well as at the city level, calling for the speakers of the council, as well as other councilpersons, to introduce a comprehensive ban on facial recognition. We even had around 10,000 citizens submit comments on the current facial recognition